Looking at the studio window this morning, there's a very specific kind of quiet settling over the town today.
Oh, absolutely. It's quite atmospheric, isn't it?
It really is. It's not that bright, glaring, aggressive sunshine that that immediately demands you put on your running shoes and try to conquer the day with this relentless efficiency.
Right. None of that exhausting sort of morning energy.
Exactly. Instead, the sky is this very soft, muted, almost slate gray. The air is cool, and honestly, it's the kind of morning where you just want to wrap both hands around a warm, heavy mug of coffee.
Just watch the steam rise and lean into a genuinely good, unhurried conversation.
Yeah, precisely.
It's a very introspective kind of light. It invites you to pause rather than to rush.
It does.
And that is exactly the atmosphere we're looking at from our vantage point right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the campus lights are just starting to flicker on over at Benedictine College.
That lovely, warm, golden glow.
Yes, casting this brilliant light against that early spring gloom. It feels like a moment completely suspended in time.
It really is the perfect cinematic setting. And for those of you waking up with us today in Atchison, we are looking at a wonderfully cool and mostly cloudy spring day.
Quite a crisp one, too.
Definitely. The temperatures are going to ease their way up into the low 60s by the afternoon. We might see a few light showers early on, too.
Just enough to give the pavement outside that incredibly clean, sharp, rain-washed scent.
Oh, I love that smell. But conditions should gradually improve as the day goes on. We might even see some sudden striking breaks in the clouds by this evening, right as the sun begins to set.
Though you will definitely want to keep a jacket handy if you're heading out to class or to work today.
Oh, for sure.
Because there's a brisk north wind sweeping down through the Missouri River Valley, and it is going to keep things feeling quite crisp.
Especially overnight, right?
Indeed, especially overnight when those temperatures drop back down into the low 40s. So overall, it is a gray but undeniably calm, peaceful May day across northeast Kansas.
And honestly, that gray, moody sky is the absolute perfect backdrop for our program today, because we are diving into a truly fascinating collection of topics.
We've got quite the journey planned.
We really do. We're going to be moving from the ancient agricultural theology of the Gospel of John straight into the chaotic, brilliant history of mid-century radio comedy scripts.
A rather sharp turn, but a fun one.
And then rounding it all out with the psychological terror of an Alfred Hitchcock thriller.
A brilliant lineup.
And our goal today, the sort of through line connecting all these seemingly disparate pieces, is to explore one central, highly counterintuitive question.
Which is?
Why does true freedom, whether we're talking about our spiritual lives, our comedy, or our deepest moral decisions, actually require us to be completely tied down?
It's a question that completely defies the modern sensibility, doesn't it?
It really does.
A modern world tells us that freedom is the absolute absence of all constraints. But the ideas we are looking at today suggest the exact opposite.
Precisely. So we are inviting you right now, wherever you are sitting, to just settle back, take a sip of that morning coffee, and join us on this journey.
And just to set our coordinates before we really get into it.
Yes, of course. You're listening to Daybreak on Chesterton Radio from Atchison, Kansas.
You know, looking out at the trees lining the streets outside the studio, you can see the very beginnings of spring trying to assert themselves.
They're trying their best.
They are. The branches are still mostly bare, looking a bit stark against the gray sky. But if you look closely, there are those tiny, stubborn little green buds fighting their way into existence.
It's a very physical springtime.
A visceral display of growth, yes.
Yeah.
Which perfectly mirrors the spiritual springtime we find in today's gospel reading.
I really want to spend some time on this text because the imagery here is incredibly rich and, honestly, often misunderstood.
Highly misunderstood.
We are looking at the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. This is the famous passage where Jesus says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser." He goes on to say, "I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing."
It's a very famous piece of scripture.
It is. Now, most people hear that and think, oh, what a lovely pastoral metaphor.
They do, and they largely miss the sheer biological intensity of what is actually being described there.
Yeah, the grit of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On one hand, yes, you have this beautiful, comforting idea of deep, organic connection. You are a branch connected directly to the source of all life.
Right.
You draw your nourishment, your sap, your very cellular existence from the vine. It's an image of profound intimacy and total radical dependence.
Which is beautiful.
It is lovely. But the text does not stop at the comforting part.
Right, because immediately after that comes the agricultural reality of the vineyard.
Which is not quite as gentle.
No, not at all. The text says, every branch of mine that bears no fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit.
Pruning is the key word there.
Right. And I am not a master gardener by any stretch, but I've read enough about viticulture, the science of growing grapes, to know that pruning is not some gentle, spa-like process for the plant.
Not in the slightest. It's violent.
It is incredibly violent.
If you leave a grapevine to its own devices, it will experience what botanists call, we'll call it apical dominance.
Apical dominance?
Yes. It will shoot all its energy into growing massive, sprawling, endlessly long vines and hundreds of huge leaves.
So it looks really impressive.
Oh, it will look incredibly lush and successful to the untrained eye, but it will produce almost no fruit.
Oh.
And the few grapes it does produce will be small, bitter, and completely useless for making wine. The plant basically prioritizes vegetative growth over reproductive growth.
It builds a monument to itself.
Exactly. It essentially builds a massive monument to itself.
Okay, wait. I need to stop you there and push back on this concept of pruning, because this raises a massive psychological question for our listeners.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
If pruning involves the vine dresser taking sharp steel shears and hacking away not just at the dead wood, but the living, sprawling, leafy branches.
The healthy-looking bits.
Right, the healthy-looking bits. How do we distinguish between necessary spiritual pruning and just plain old trauma?
That is the essential terror of the spiritual life, isn't it?
Because from the perspective of the branch, being cut with a steel blade feels like destruction. It doesn't feel like love.
No, it feels entirely destructive.
Mm-hmm.
But the distinction lies entirely in the intent and the identity of the vine dresser.
Okay.
Trauma is random destruction, right? A storm breaking a branch off, or a careless animal trampling it.
Unpredictable and pointless.
Exactly. Pruning, however, is intentional, calculated, and highly specific reduction aimed entirely at future flourishing.
It has a very specific telos, a purpose.
Spot on. The vine dresser cuts back the healthy-looking but ultimately useless leaves so that the plant's lifeblood, the sap, is forced into the fruit.
It's an enforced limitation.
Yes. You are being forced to face your own limitations so that you can produce something sweet and lasting, rather than just taking up space.
Man, this connects so perfectly to the modern psychological landscape.
How so?
Well, think about how the average listener feels on a Tuesday afternoon. We are chronically burnt out, emotionally depleted, and feeling entirely unproductive.
Absolutely drained.
And why is that? Because modern life essentially functions as a massive, highly organized campaign to convince people to live entirely detached from the vine.
We elevate hyper-individualism to the status of a supreme virtue.
Yes. The cultural message broadcasted from every screen is, you must be your own vine.
You must generate your own life force.
Your own meaning, your own energy. You must be entirely self-sufficient. And if you're feeling depleted, well, the culture tells you that you just aren't trying hard enough.
You need to optimize yourself better.
I was reading an article recently about the explosion of the productivity industry, and it really struck me how absurd it all is.
The life hacks and all that?
Yes. Think about the modern obsession with life hacks, these rigid 10-step morning routines, and incredibly complex time management apps.
It's exhausting just to think about.
Right. In the context of this gospel, isn't all of that just a desperate attempt to tape a severed branch back onto a tree and hope it miraculously starts growing apples?
That is a devastatingly accurate image.
It's just tape.
It is tape. We
Basically.
feel ourselves withering because we are fundamentally disconnected from the source of life, and our brilliant solution is to download a new calendar app.
Or drink a slightly more expensive kind of green juice.
Or optimize our sleep cycles with a wearable ring. We are trying to engineer fruitfulness out of a severed branch through sheer technological force.
And it creates this profound anxiety, doesn't it? Because a branch cannot generate life. It can only receive it and pass it on.
Precisely.
You cannot life hack your way into spiritual nourishment, which really brings us to the core of the Chestertonian paradox here.
Yes, let's get into that.
Modernity tells us that freedom is absolute independence. Freedom means cutting the cord, detaching from the vine, blowing wherever the wind takes you.
Never being tied down to any dogmas or relationships or messy obligations.
But Chesterton always pointed out the absurdity of that definition. True freedom, true flourishing, requires a fixed point.
Think of a kite.
Ooh, yes.
A kite can only fly, it can only soar and dance in the wind because it is tethered securely to the ground by a string.
The string is a constraint, yes.
It limits the kite. But the moment you cut that string in the name of freedom, the kite doesn't fly higher.
No, it instantly crashes into the nearest tree and is destroyed.
Exactly. So the paradox we are looking at is that true freedom and true growth only come from absolute radical dependence.
By submitting to the connection to the vine, by allowing ourselves to be bound to something greater.
And, crucially, by submitting to the painful pruning of our selfish, sprawling tendencies.
Right, we actually become free to bear fruit. The severed branch is quote-unquote free from the tree, but it's only free to wither, turn brown, and be thrown into the fire.
We cling to our little withered leaves, terrified of the vine dresser's shears, not realizing that the pruning is the very thing that makes the spring blossoms outside our window right now entirely possible.
We have to be willing to lose what is unnecessary to cultivate what is essential.
It's a difficult lesson, but a vital one.
It really is. You know, that idea of a shared connection, a bond so deep and secure that it allows for friction and pruning and cutting without destroying the relationship.
That's a brilliant segue.
I try, because that is actually the perfect thematic bridge into our next topic.
Yes, let's pivot a bit.
When we talk about deep bonds, we often naively assume they must be purely serene and peaceful, like a placid lake.
Which is almost never the case in reality.
Exactly. Sometimes the most profound connections are hidden beneath layers of intense, highly choreographed conflict.
Indeed. We are moving from the theological vine to the golden age of broadcasting.
One of my absolute favorite eras.
Mine too.
Yeah?
We're going to examine one of the most famous, seemingly antagonistic, but actually deeply attached relationships in the history of American entertainment.
The legendary vaudeville and radio feud between Jack Benny and Fred Allen.
A true clash of titans.
Now, for our younger listeners, or those who simply aren't massive mid-century radio nerds like we obviously are, we need to establish who these men were.
They were absolute giants of the medium.
They really were. Jack Benny and Fred Allen didn't just appear out of nowhere on the radio. They came up through the grueling, trial-by-fire world of vaudeville in the early 20th century.
And vaudeville was a brutal proving ground.
Absolutely brutal.
For those unfamiliar, vaudeville was a network, a physical circuit of theaters across North America. Performers would travel from town to town doing 5 or 6 shows a day.
And the audiences were famously ruthless.
Oh, they would eat you alive. If you didn't win them over in the first 30 seconds, they would literally boo you off the stage.
You were competing with acrobats and animal acts and opera singers.
Right. It forced comedians to hone their timing to a microscopic level of precision.
And both Benny and Allen mastered that stage. But when radio emerged in the 1920s and 30s, it terrified a lot of vaudevillians.
Because the model was so entirely different.
Yes. In vaudeville, you could tour with the exact same 12-minute comedy routine for 5 years.
You just changed towns.
Exactly. But on the radio, you broadcasted your best material to the entire country in one night. And the next week, you had to have a completely new script.
Radio demanded endless, relentless invention.
And it was Fred Allen who famously and somewhat jokingly accused Jack Benny of being the man who killed vaudeville by making radio so popular.
But what Benny and Allen understood better than anyone else was the mechanics of this new medium. Radio is, famously, the theater of the mind.
The theater of the mind. I love that phrase.
It's so apt. They didn't have visual gags. They couldn't rely on a funny hat or a pratfall.
Right. They had to construct entire physical environments and character dynamics using nothing but dialogue, impeccable timing, and the incredibly inventive work of live Foley artists in the studio.
And they used that theater of the mind to construct a legendary decade-long insult comedy feud that had the entire nation tuning in.
Let's actually dive into the specific mechanics of this comedy, because I was re-listening to the broadcast we pulled from the archives.
Oh, it's brilliant.
It is a masterclass in psychological character building. Fred Allen played the sharp-tongued, highly articulate, world-weary cynic.
The intellect.
Yes. And Jack Benny cultivated this brilliant persona of a vain, deeply insecure, and hilariously cheap man.
Pathologically cheap.
Pathologically. And there is a sequence in this episode that perfectly illustrates the math of Benny's cheapness.
Ah, yes, the 12-cent refund sketch.
It is so funny.
It is arguably one of the most brilliantly scripted jokes in radio history. So a destitute listener comes into the studio demanding a refund for an 80-cent show that Benny put on.
Right. The listener says he hated the show and wants his money back. And Benny, rather than just handing him the 80 cents to make him go away, which any normal person would do,
he employs this breathtaking mental gymnastics to justify keeping the money.
he starts aggressively itemizing the show's value by the act.
It's brilliant. He says, okay, you got the Sportsman Quartet, that's worth 15 cents. You heard Marjorie Reynolds sing, that's a quarter. Rochester's Comedy, 20 cents. Phil Harris and his orchestra, 10 cents.
And the destitute listener who is playing the straight man just perfectly just nods along, agreeing that yes, those individual acts were indeed worth those specific pennies.
Which, if you do the math, brings the total value of the supporting cast to 68 cents.
Leaving a grand balance of exactly 12 cents for Jack Benny's own performance.
And the listener says in this incredibly pathetic, shaking voice, I would like to have my 12 cents.
Oh, it breaks your heart a little. He explains that he is completely destitute. It is his last quarter, he hasn't eaten all day, and he desperately needs a dime to ride the bus home in the freezing cold.
And Benny, utilizing that legendary, agonizing, drawn-out pause he was famous for.
A pause that you could only get away with on radio.
Exactly. He just stubbornly refuses to hand over the 12 cents. He dismissively tells the starving man that he'll never catch a bus at 9 o'clock anyway.
The reason this is so enduringly funny is the absolute consistency of the character. Benny isn't just randomly mean.
No, not at all.
He is logically, defensively, pathologically cheap. He has broken his entire existence, his very ego, down into literal pennies.
And because the audience intimately knows this character flaw, the joke lands perfectly.
And interspersed with this brilliant character work are these absolutely bizarre rapid-fire vaudeville jokes that Fred Allen brings into the script.
They're almost surrealist in their construction.
They really are. They require a very specific kind of linguistic agility to pull off. It is wordplay taken to an absurd extreme.
Could you give an example?
Oh, like the background announcement that the Hay Fever Guild will meet for pollen drill.
Yeah.
Or when someone shushes the room because the acoustics bruise easily and they might have to dab Minute Rub on the theater walls.
That's so clever.
Or my absolute favorite, the kid whose baby brother swallowed a golf ball, so the mother is going to spank the baby with a niblick, which is the old Scottish term for a 9-iron.
It's just pure chaotic word association.
But the narrative core of the specific broadcast we are examining is the supposed origin story of their legendary feud.
Which is naturally completely contradictory depending on who is telling it.
Of course, in true comedic fashion, they each present the audience with completely contradictory memories of how they first met years ago in Boston.
The Rashomon effect played for laughs.
Yes. Okay, I want to unpack Benny's version first because it is pure, unadulterated ego.
Go for it.
Benny remembers himself as the grand, wealthy, universally beloved headliner at the Boston Metropolitan Theater.
Naturally.
He describes himself sitting in a luxurious, silk-draped dressing room, utterly exhausted from performing 7 encores, delicately removing his stage makeup.
And according to Benny, in walks a young, starry-eyed, desperate Fred Allen.
Who was part of the lowly, uncredited opening act, an act called Fink's Mules.
Yes, Benny paints Allen as this pathetic figure begging the great master for advice on this terrifying new medium called radio.
And Benny, in his infinite condescending generosity, outlines his brilliant idea for a show where he walks down Benny's Boulevard and interviews 4 stereotypical characters.
And the punchline of Benny's memory is that Allen immediately steals the idea, creating his famous real-life radio segment, Allen's Alley.
In Benny's mind, he is the benevolent, betrayed genius.
But then, the broadcast seamlessly shifts to Fred Allen's version of the exact same meeting.
And it is completely inverted.
Entirely. In Allen's memory, he is the brilliant headlining star at the Metropolitan Theater. He's in the luxurious dressing room, and in bursts a desperate, poverty-stricken, talentless Jack Benny.
And the detail Allen provides is magnificent. Allen claims the opening act wasn't mules, but a Japanese juggling troupe who lie on their backs and juggle a giant wooden barrel with their feet.
And inside that barrel, curled up in the dark, spitting wildly, is Jack Benny, playing the song Ireland Must Be Heaven on his violin.
I can just hear that music coming out through the bunghole, Allen says.
It is such a vivid, physically humiliating image.
In Allen's version, Benny begs for a job, offering to be his lowly stooge in radio.
But the absolute pinnacle of this script, the moment that truly dissects the psychology of show business, is when they flash back to a time they supposedly worked together as a desperate double act called Benny and Allen.
Oh, this sketch.
They go to the office of Mickey Rockford, supposedly the biggest, most ruthless booking agent in New York City.
This scene is a brilliant satire on the indignities of the entertainment industry. They swagger into the waiting room, trying to intimidate the secretary by bragging about their incredible tour history.
They boast about playing a week in Sowbelly, Wyoming.
A week in Loose Tooth, Arizona.
And 3 glorious days in stagnant water, New Mexico.
And then almost as an afterthought, they throw in, oh, and the palace here in New York.
And the secretary, completely unimpressed, deadpans, well, at least you worked your way up.
And Benny, utterly oblivious, replies, no, we played the palace first.
It perfectly captures the profound delusion of the struggling artist. Their trajectory is entirely downward, but their ego won't let them see it.
When they finally get into Rockford's office, they perform a snippet of their act, which is a disastrous, unlistenable cacophony of Alan's clarinet, Benny's screeching violin, and terrible jokes about women's bathing suits made of spun glass.
The agent, Rockford, is repulsed. He tells them the act leaves me cold. It's neither fish nor fowl.
To which they cheerfully reply, that's funny, the last agent we went to thought it was both.
But the climax of the scene, the moment that defines their relationship, is the bidding war.
Yes.
Rockford tells them he doesn't have an opening for a double act, but he has a single opening in Scranton, Pennsylvania, paying a miserable $15 a week.
And instantly, the great, unbreakable fraternal bond of Benny and Alan shatters into a million pieces.
Alan shouts, I'll take it.
And Benny is absolutely outraged. He calls Alan a perfidious ingrate. And Benny declares, rather than let you hire this no-talented wage cutter, I'll take the job for $10 a week.
And so begins the most pathetic race to the bottom in comedic history. Alan bids $8, Benny bids $5, Alan bids $3.
Benny, blinded by spite, says he will do it for nothing.
Alan says he will also do it for nothing.
And Rockford, representing the ultimate vampiric nature of the management class, simply says, well, at that price, I can afford both of you.
It is an impeccably constructed piece of narrative comedy.
But, if we step back from the brilliant timing and the jokes, there is a profound psychological mechanism at play here.
Indeed.
Why did this feud captivate the entire nation for over a decade? It certainly was not because people genuinely thought these two men hated each other.
Exactly the opposite. The comedy worked entirely and only because the two men profoundly respected, trusted, and loved each other in real life.
If there had been even a hint of actual malice, the comedy would have instantly turned sour.
It would have been uncomfortable and unlistenable. Because their real-life connection was so secure, because they were both deeply attached to the same vine of mutual admiration and comedic craftsmanship, they had the freedom to brutally prune each other on the air.
I was thinking about this in the context of modern media, and I want to try out an analogy here.
Right, let's hear it.
I look at modern social media feuds, influencers canceling each other on YouTube or X, and it is just deeply depressing.
Incredibly toxic.
Today, a feud is a genuine street brawl. It is an unscripted, malicious attempt to destroy the other person's livelihood, to ruin their reputation permanently.
Scorched earth.
Exactly. But Benny and Alan's feud wasn't a street brawl, and it wasn't a boxing match where the goal was a knockout. It was professional wrestling.
That is a very precise metaphor. Expand on that.
Well, in professional wrestling, the performers are hitting each other with folding chairs and throwing each other through tables, but they rehearse the choreography in the locker room beforehand to make sure nobody actually broke a rib. They are working together to create a spectacle that elevates both of their profiles. Benny and Alan were executing a carefully choreographed dance. They were playing a game, and crucially, the audience was invited to be in on the joke.
Radio created an intimacy with audiences that modern, hyper-fragmented, algorithmic media really struggles to replicate.
You felt like you knew them.
When you listen to Benny and Alan, you weren't just a passive consumer, you were a participant. You were sitting in the living room with them, understanding the rules of their secure attachment. It was a shared inside joke that spanned an entire continent.
That idea of a shared joke and inside language that builds trust is exactly what sustains any real community.
It's the glue.
It is, and you see that exact same dynamic playing out physically on a college campus, which brings us naturally to the events happening right outside our studio window at Benedictine College this week.
It is a perfect transition because the campus is practically humming with that very specific, highly charged energy that only occurs in late spring.
Oh, you can feel it in the air.
The students are finishing up the semester, and if you walk across the quad, you can feel that palpable collegiate mix of utter physical exhaustion and high intellectual excitement.
It is the runway to finals week. And honestly, we have to offer our deepest, most profound sympathies to the students today.
We really do.
Because the physical landscape of their suffering has shifted. The Student Success Center is officially closed for testing today because it is study day.
Which means all the final exam test proctoring has been exiled to the Murphy Recreation Center.
A great migration of the stressed and caffeinated.
I can literally picture them right now, hauling their massive, overstuffed backpacks.
Their laptops, their triple-shot coffees.
All across campus, leaning into that brisk north wind we mentioned earlier, trekking all the way to the rec center.
Exams can be picked up and delivered there today and Monday from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and Tuesday morning. After that, everything moves back to the SSC.
So, Godspeed to all the Ravens making that journey today.
May your memory be sharp and your thesis statements be clear.
Amen to that. But beyond the very real stress of finals, there are some truly wonderful intellectual pursuits happening on campus that reflect the deeper, unifying mission of the college.
It's not all just stress and exam.
Exactly. Rather than just read a list of events, I want to highlight one that perfectly encapsulates our earlier themes.
Oh, which one?
Tonight at 7 p.m. in the McAllister Boardroom up on the 4th floor of the Farrell Academic Center, Sister M. Lucy Gant is giving a presentation titled Encountering God in Science.
Oh, I saw the flyer for this, and it is a fascinating premise.
It really is. She is concluding her time with the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, and she is bringing together insights from chemistry, biology, and astronomy to discuss the divine.
What is so vital about this presentation is how it directly combats one of the most damaging detachments of the modern era.
The artificial divorce between faith and reason.
Yes. For centuries, the church was the primary patron of the sciences. The man who formulated the Big Bang Theory, Georges Lemaitre, was a Catholic priest. But today, we operate under this false dichotomy that you must choose between the laboratory and the altar.
Sister Lucy is demonstrating that an intense, rigorous attention to the physical mechanisms of the universe, the complexity of a cell, or the life cycle of a star, can lead directly to an uplifting encounter with the Creator.
It is exactly what we were talking about with the Gospel of John. It is finding the fingerprints of the vine dresser on the cellular structure of the vine itself.
To have a presentation that weaves those disciplines back together is really quite special.
It requires a synthesis of thought that is rare today.
And speaking of synthesis and the mastery of complex disciplines, the faculty here are producing some truly remarkable work. We must mention Dr. Christopher Greco.
The professor of music.
Yes, who has just released a new CD titled Baroque for soprano saxophone and piano, released on Navona Records. He is featured on the soprano sax alongside Po Simhead on piano.
I actually went down a massive rabbit hole researching this yesterday because the achievement here is deeply technical.
Oh, it's astonishing.
The album made the cover of Fanfare magazine, which is essentially the gold standard for classical music review. But what fascinated me is the historical anachronism of what Dr. Greco is doing.
The instrument itself.
Right. The saxophone was invented in the 1840s by Adolphe Sax. It was originally designed for military bands to bridge the acoustic gap between woodwinds and brass, and of course it later became the defining instrument of jazz.
Correct. It is an instrument inherently associated with the 19th and 20th centuries.
Right. But Baroque music, Bach, Vivaldi, Handel, was written in the 17th and early 18th century.
Long before the saxophone existed.
Exactly. And Baroque music relies on incredibly intense, rigorous contrapuntal lines originally designed for the violin, the oboe, or the harpsichord.
Which respond very differently than a saxophone.
To play complex Baroque counterpoint on a saxophone requires an almost superhuman level of breath control, circular breathing, and embouchure manipulation. You have to force an instrument designed for loud, sweeping jazz to behave with the mathematical precision of a Bach partita.
The technical difficulty is staggering, which is why Fanfare took notice.
It is the ultimate pruning of an instrument's natural tendencies to produce a highly refined, specific fruit.
It is a brilliant cross-pollination of eras and styles, and it speaks to the high level of craftsmanship occurring within the walls of this institution.
And speaking of the walls of the institution, a quick practical note for anyone visiting Campus St. Benedict Hall. Main floor renovations are officially starting today.
Uh-huh.
So just a friendly warning that the main floor restrooms are closed. You'll have to use the ones upstairs or downstairs.
A minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things.
And we also want to celebrate Dr. Lindsay Kennedy, who just became a Confluence Writers Project Fellow for the St. Louis Shakespeare Festival.
Smashing news for the English department.
Truly. And if you're feeling all this local pride bubbling up, you can always grab an Atchison Heritage tea at the Raven Store. It celebrates the town's roots dating back to 1858.
It's a lovely design, too.
It is. And as you take all that in the rigorous science lectures, the world-class musical achievements, the students braving the wind for finals, let me just give you a gentle reminder of where you are. You're starting your day with Daybreak, right here in Atchison.
We have spent the morning discussing how vital it is to be bound to things. Bound to the spiritual vine, bound by the choreography of comedic partnership, bound to the intellectual community of a college.
The ties that hold us together.
Exactly. But now, I think we must pivot to examine what happens when a sacred bond becomes a devastating, inescapable, and potentially lethal burden.
This is perhaps my favorite piece of media we are discussing today.
It's incredibly powerful.
We're moving from the joyful community bonds of Benedictine College to the absolute crushing weight of moral and spiritual truth. We are talking about Alfred Hitchcock's cinematic masterpiece, I confess.
Specifically, analyzing the adaptation performed on the Lux Radio Theater.
Right. And to fully appreciate this, we need to understand what the Lux Radio Theater was. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, before television had fully saturated the culture, Lux Radio Theater was a cultural juggernaut.
Massive audiences.
Huge. It adapted hit Hollywood films into hour-long live radio plays, often utilizing the original film stars. But listening to this specific broadcast today provides a surreal, almost whiplash-inducing psychological experience.
The juxtaposition is absolutely staggering.
It really is. You have this incredibly intense, high-stakes, Hitchcockian thriller dealing with murder, blackmail, the shadow of the gallows, and profound Catholic guilt.
Heavy, heavy themes.
And the tension is constantly cheerfully interrupted by enthusiastic commercials for soap.
It is the brutal reality of mid-century corporate sponsorship.
It's jarring.
It is. You have a scene where a man is wrestling with the agonizing choice between his own execution and breaking a sacred vow to God. The music swells to a dramatic crescendo, and then suddenly a relentlessly chipper announcer is telling you that Lux toilet soap is used by 9 out of 10 Hollywood stars, like Gene Simmons and Barbara Stanwyck.
And don't forget the Chloroden toothpaste commercials.
Oh, goodness, yes.
The announcer literally says, when you say good morning, does your breath say morning, morning, morning?
It is so bizarre, but it is also a fascinating artifact of the era. It perfectly captures the domestic banality of American consumerism, sitting right alongside profound existential terror.
But let us delve into the narrative mechanics itself, because the premise of I Confess is arguably one of the most brilliant moral dilemmas ever constructed in fiction.
Hitchcock, who had a deep, complex relationship with his own Catholic upbringing, understood the terrifying dramatic potential of church law.
I will lay out the plot carefully because every piece of this trap really matters. Cary Grant plays Father Michael Logan, a highly respected Catholic priest in Quebec.
A very stoic figure.
Very. Late one night, a man named Otto Keller comes into the darkened, empty church. Keller is a German refugee who works as a sexton at the rectory.
And Keller goes into the confessional booth, kneels down, and admits to Father Logan that he just murdered a prominent local lawyer named Villette.
And Keller provides the motive. He needed $2,000 so he and his wife, Alma, could escape poverty and start a new life.
And the twist.
He confesses that he was actually wearing a priest's cassock to disguise himself when Villette surprised him in the house, and he killed him in a panic.
So here's the trap, and we need to explain the theology behind this for listeners who might not be familiar with Catholic canon law.
Right, this is crucial.
Because Keller confessed this murder inside the sacrament of penance, Father Logan is bound by the absolute seal of confession.
The seal is inviolable.
Completely. He cannot tell the police. He cannot tell his bishop. He cannot even hint at it through his actions. He is legally and morally gagged.
Even as the brilliant police inspector LaRue begins investigating and starts suspecting Father Logan himself because a priest was seen leaving the scene of the crime.
To understand the weight of this, you have to understand the concept of in persona Christi. When a priest hears a confession, Catholic theology dictates that he is acting in the person of Christ.
The priest is merely an instrument. The confession is made directly to God.
Therefore, the priest's memory of the sin is canonically considered obliterated. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 codified this strictly. If a priest breaks the seal of confession, even to save a life, even to save a nation, he incurs a latae sententiae excommunication, an automatic, immediate expulsion from the church.
He loses his soul.
Hitchcock weaponizes this theological absolute to create unbearable suspense.
Okay, I want to push back on the format for a second, though. I watched the film version directed by Hitchcock, and then I listened to this radio play. And I have to say, cinema is fundamentally a visual medium. Hitchcock was the master of visual tension. The looming shadows of the Quebec architecture, the stark lighting on Cary Grant's face, the camera lingering on the cassock.
The visual language is iconic.
It is. So doesn't the radio version strip away the very tools that made Hitchcock a genius? Doesn't it lose its psychological terror without the camera?
It is a valid critique, but I would argue the exact opposite. I think the radio adaptation actually heightens the specific terror of this particular story.
How so?
Think about the mechanics of radio. Radio is a medium entirely reliant on talking. Dead air is the enemy of broadcasting.
Sure.
Therefore, when a character is legally and morally bound not to speak, the tension becomes physically agonizing. In the radio play, when Inspector LaRue asks Father Logan a direct, pressing question about his whereabouts, and there is just silence, the Foley artists let the silence hang.
You can feel the clock ticking.
The listener feels the friction physically. A man whose very biological survival depends on opening his mouth, but who refuses to do so, becomes the ultimate source of suspense. In radio, the restraint is the action.
Okay, when you frame it like that, it makes perfect sense. Think about how hard it is for you, the listener, to keep a minor, harmless secret at the office for a week.
The urge to gossip is overwhelming.
Right. Now imagine holding a secret that will literally send you to the gallows simply because you made a promise to God.
It's unthinkable for most people.
The dialogue scenes with Inspector LaRue are incredibly tense. LaRue is methodical, relentless, and Father Logan just keeps calmly repeating variations of, "I have done my best, but you refuse to answer my questions. It isn't possible for me to answer them."
And just when you think the trap cannot get any tighter, the narrative introduces Ruth Granford, played by Phyllis Thaxter,
who accidentally seals Father Logan's doom while trying to save him.
This is where the plot becomes a Greek tragedy.
It really does. Ruth is married to a prominent member of Parliament. But years ago, before Logan became a priest, she and Logan were deeply in love.
And Ruth knows for a fact that Logan met with the murdered man, Villette, on the very morning after the murder.
Because she knows Logan is innocent, she desperately tries to provide him with an alibi. She goes to the police and the Crown prosecutor and publicly admits that she and Logan were together walking in the city on the night of the murder between 9 and 11 o'clock.
But she doesn't know the whole story.
Because Villette, the murdered lawyer, was actually blackmailing Ruth over her past romance with Logan.
He was threatening to cause a massive scandal that would completely ruin her husband's political career.
So, by coming forward to provide an alibi, Ruth accidentally hands the police the perfect, airtight motive for Logan to be the killer.
It is the ultimate tragic irony. She tries to clear his name, and in doing so, she gives the prosecution the exact narrative they need to arrest him.
They logically assume Father Logan killed Villette to protect Ruth's honor and silence the blackmailer.
The snare is drawn completely shut.
The climax in the courtroom is emotionally grueling. The prosecutor paints Logan as a monster, a man hiding behind a Roman collar, capable of brutal violence to protect his illicit lover.
And Logan just sits there in the dock, absorbing the hatred, absorbing the accusations, utterly refusing to implicate Otto Keller.
The jury eventually finds him not guilty, based purely on a lack of direct circumstantial evidence, but the judge publicly expresses his disgust with the verdict,
effectively ruining Logan's reputation and turning the entire city against him.
The crowd outside the courthouse forms a literal lynch mob. They spit at him. They are ready to tear him apart in the street.
And this is the moment where the guilt finally shatters Otto Keller's wife, Alma. She cannot watch this innocent priest be destroyed, and she tries to shout to the crowd that Logan is innocent.
And Keller, panicking, shoots his own wife in the chaos.
A horrific moment.
He flees into a hotel ballroom, cornered by the police, and even then, even after Keller has ruined his life, allowed him to stand trial and just committed another murder.
Father Logan still walks into the ballroom to try to save the man's soul.
Keller screams at him, calling him a hypocrite, assuming Logan broke the seal of confession to the police. But Logan hasn't.
Keller is eventually shot by the police, and in his dying moments, he realizes the priest's absolute fidelity and asks Logan for forgiveness.
What elevates I Confess from a mere thriller to a profound piece of art is how it treats its Catholic themes with uncompromising, rigorous intelligence.
It portrays the absolute moral seriousness of the sacraments.
Exactly. Contrast this with modern Hollywood thrillers. In a modern movie, morality is entirely fluid.
A modern screenwriter would have the hero justify breaking his vow to save himself, arguing that the greater good requires exposing the killer.
Or they would invent some clever, cynical loophole in the third act. But I Confess operates on the premise that objective moral truths exist and that some spiritual vows are vastly more important than biological survival.
Father Logan is the kite tied to the string.
Yes, he is entirely bound by his vows, and yet, in his absolute silence, he possesses an ultimate, terrifying freedom that completely bewilders the police, the prosecutor, and the mob.
They cannot comprehend a man who will not act in his own self-interest.
He demonstrates that the ultimate freedom is the freedom to lay down one's life for a truth greater than oneself.
It is a profound meditation on sacrifice.
It really is. And as we pull this entire morning's journey together, as the clouds begin to shift just a bit outside the studio window, it is striking how every single thing we have discussed today centers on the things that bind us.
Indeed, it is a remarkable tapestry of human connection. We started with the deep, necessary, and often painful spiritual connection to the vine in the Gospel of John.
The biological understanding that true growth requires both secure attachment and rigorous, intentional pruning.
Then we looked at the affection and communal bond hidden just beneath the surface of the barbs exchanged by Jack Benny and Fred Allen.
A connection so thoroughly secure it allowed for a decade of legendary, choreographed comedy.
We saw the rhythm of ordinary communal life happening right now at Benedictine College students, sharing the physical burden of finals week. Scholars reconciling the divine with biochemistry, and musicians pruning their instruments to elevate their craft.
And finally, we witnessed the unbreakable sacrificial vow of silence in I Confess, where a man allows himself to be bound by a truth he cannot speak even unto death.
All of these sources point to the same reality. We are not meant to be severed branches.
So, as you finish the last drop of your coffee and look out at this gray, brisk morning, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you start your day.
A parting provocation.
We live in a world that constantly, relentlessly demands that we express every passing thought, post every unformed opinion, and immediately sever every relationship or tie that slightly inconveniences us.
The noise is deafening.
But perhaps in such a noisy, detached age, the most radical and rebellious things we can possibly do are to stay firmly attached to the vine and, like Father Logan, learn the immense sacred power of keeping quiet.
A profound thought for a thoughtful morning.
Be sure to grab a heavy coat if you are heading out the door. That north wind is not messing around today. You've been listening to Daybreak from Chesterton Radio.